I have searched long and hard for the moral justification to create an openly cannibalistic society, and I think I've finally found it. You see, in my spare time, I like to take strange and exciting combinations of prescription medication while browsing Wikipedia. That's when I came across this quote, "Property is theft." What a grand and intoxicating idea. The implications of this are far-reaching. For example, if all property is theft, then you don't really have any right to own anything, including but not limited to your own flesh. What's yours is mine, if only I take it, and especially if I eat it. By exercising this disingenuous form of mental gymnastics, we can finally become not only cannibals, but morally virtuous people in the process. Simply amazing. However, there is one problem. There are already a lot of cannibals in Kenshi, and I've just decided they're the bad kind of cannibal. Our goal? Become the dominant man-eating faction in Kenshi through intertribal warfare and weaponized cannibalism. Let's begin. Here we are, a gaggle of would-be people eaters with nothing but a dream and an insatiable appetite. The first thing we need to take care of is securing some kind of food source. However, the typical Kenshi cuisine won't do. We need human flesh. The key to acquiring this item, whether it be in Kenshi or in real life, is to prey upon members of society who are physically or mentally incapable of stopping you from repossessing their internal organs. Typically, as the player, that would be us, but there is one faction even more pathetic than Reggie's man-lovers, the Hungry Bandits. So we set out at once to locate and consume them. After an extensive period of aimless wandering, we managed to locate a small herd of bandits, which we subsequently engaged in combat. This is important not only to feed ourselves, but to train our combat skills, thus allowing us to climb to a higher position on Kenshi's food pyramid. We fought for some time, and after creatively rearranging their skeletal structure, we managed to render 3 bandits unconscious. All we have to do now is open their inventory and withdraw a lethal amount of human flesh. As far as food goes, this isn't much, but then again, I'm not sure what I was expecting from a gang known primarily for their own starvation. Now listen, I love chasing down and eating the homeless as much as the next guy, but if we want to get serious about this, we've got to take it to the big leagues. I'm talking about the Cannibal Plains. We set off on our journey northward to our ancestral homeland. Upon arriving, we were greeted by a gang of hostile cannibals that had new and compelling ideas about dismembering us. However, I wasn't interested in that, so I led them into a squad of tech hunters who massacred them entirely. We managed to acquire some decent loot from this encounter: armor, weapons, edible necklaces made of human ears, and of course, we were also able to remove their heads. This kills the cannibal. We collected as many body parts as we could and headed westward to a fishing village where I sold the shopkeeper no less than 35 decapitated heads. I don't know why she kept buying them or what she's using them for, but until the police get involved, I'm just going to keep taking the money. We spent the night here recovering from some wounds while listening to the near constant screams of agony echoing across the open plains.
Oh, you pound fan! Up the eye of your talk!
Peaceful, really. Now, of course, we all know that there is absolutely nothing wrong with a diet of human ears. However, the refined man knows where the real nutrition is. It's in these bad boys. The Department of Agriculture doesn't want you to know this, but a single human limb can contain as much as 90 nutrition. If we want to have any hope of creating cannibal utopia, we're going to need a lot of limbs. Fortunately, they're all around us. We just need some kind of meat processing plant capable of harvesting them. It took us a few days to gather the necessary resources, and a lot of people had to die, but eventually we were able to start a base. I decided to name our settlement Meat Cove. Our base is pretty modest, just a dilapidated shack really, with an industrial potato peeler inside, but it's a good start. The nice thing about this biome is that you can't go more than 5 feet without encountering a dead body, and so production was well underway. After only a few hours, we had already produced dozens of limbs. My goal at this point was to stockpile as much nutrition as possible to last us for the rest of the challenge, but eventually we ran out of dead bodies, and so we had to turn to the more lively ones. Despite our fierce appearance, we are still fairly weak, and we certainly can't defeat other cannibals yet. However, we can harass the innocent, specifically the holy farmers. Every day we travel south to hunt holy farmers, and every night we eat them and throw away the spare parts. For the most part, they don't put up much of a fight. In fact, their only defense mechanism seems to be the ability to undergo extreme rigor mortis while still being alive. Personally, I find their impression of Tetris blocks to be rather unsettling, so maybe this tactic is working. Regardless, our harassment of the peasantry has caused the Holy Nation to become hostile to us. This gives us about a 40% chance of being enslaved and crucified, but a 100% chance of never having to go to prayer day ever again. That's a risk I'm willing to take. Now, with a surplus of food, we are finally in a position where we can start vying for control of the cannibal plains. But what does that mean exactly? How can we supplant the current cannibal factions and establish our dominance? Well, the cannibal leadership is composed of the mighty Canhead, the Meatlord, and the Grand Cannibal Wizard. I believe if we can defeat and cannibalize each of these public figures, their armies will have no choice but to recognize us as the alpha cannibals and submit to our authority. But if we want to stand any chance of accomplishing this, we're going to need to expand our roster. To do this, we will need to kidnap other cannibals and take them to our patented re-education camp, whereby they will either be recruited or processed into Swedish meatballs. Normally, we'd have to be very proactive and actually go out looking for our targets. However, the cannibals are extremely territorial and they've been sending weekly raids to our base for about a month now. Up until this point, we've been using the tried and true method of hiding in nearby foliage whenever we would get raided, and it's kind of amusing watching 50 cannibals slam themselves into the side of a building like it's some kind of clown car, but finally, it's time to fight back. We erected some basic walls around the base and utilized the classic water maze strategy. All approaching enemies will have to swim through several Olympic-sized swimming pools before they even have the opportunity to attack our gate. Personally, this would be enough to dissuade me, but just to be safe, I've also mounted several high-powered laser rifles to the ramparts which we will use to scorch and vaporize our enemies on approach. This will make their swim considerably less enjoyable. You might think it's kind of weird that a group of illiterate tribesmen have laser turrets, but it was surprisingly easy to research, and honestly, I'm morbidly curious to see how these doughy little bastards stand up to space-age technology. We built 6 of these turrets, and we didn't have to wait long until a local cannibal faction decided to investigate. It's now time to set our phasers to cannibalism. Our enemies began doggy paddling their way through the maze, but little did they know they were entering the only laser light show with a 100% mortality rate. Our lasers began ripping their ranks apart, and it didn't take long before we had over 20 enemy cannibals in various stages of decomposition all throughout our pool. Luckily, we managed to fish out a couple live ones and nurse them back to health. We repeated this process every couple of days, more attacks, more meat, more recruits, more turrets, rinse and repeat. After a few weeks, we managed to bolster our numbers to 20. Personally, 20 is my upper limit, because manually feeding this many people makes me wish I was born in the Congo, where all I'd have to worry about is drinking brown water and avoiding landmines. The base is really shaping up though. We've managed to stockpile a fairly impressive amount of human limbs, and we're even branching out into the fine dining experience. No longer will our men be subjected to eating chunks of raw meat like some kind of wild animal, because now Chef Thumb Thumb is cooking up a wide selection of the finest delicacies in all of Kenshi. Eyeball soup, severed finger fries, and of course, human skin. Just your average British cuisine really, but it's all happening here at Meat Cove. Apart from that, we also began some basic weaponsmithing. By manufacturing our own weapons and armor, we can provide ourselves a very unique advantage over all those naked savages out there. You may be wondering how we've managed to finance all this base development. After all, the local merchants typically look down on using human limbs as currency. The answer is simple: cocaine. Inspired by the real Meat Cove, I've decided to start up our own cocaine empire and sell our goods to the local factions. Sales have been great, all thanks to our foolproof business model. It's very simple actually. We just approach a group of farmers and present them the following option: become a cocaine addict, or be cannibalized right now. Seemingly not satisfied with being a mere cocaine dealer, I also found out about the inbred half-brother of the peeler machine, the juicer. You put one body in here and it quickly processes it into a highly expensive blood rum, which we have also been selling to the locals. The nice thing about this is that the juicer works even if the body doesn't have limbs, so by first de-limbing our enemies on the peeler, we can then transport them to the juicer to ensure nothing goes to waste. We are really aiming to recycle every part of the human body here. Just another one of my eco-warrior playthroughs, I guess. We've been using all this money to prepare, but for what? Up until now, we've only been receiving small to medium-sized raids, but it's just a matter of time until the mighty Canhead decides to launch an assault on our base, and he's known to have a posse of no less than 50 professional ball washers. We continued to terrorize our neighbors and train our soldiers until one day, it finally happened. The mighty Canhead is en route. We manned the battle stations and set up a small garrison of guards just in case our enemy broke through the gate. Our combat stats were pretty impressive by this point, but I don't care how strong you are, fighting 50 crack fiends is always going to be a tall order. Actually, no, that was pretty easy. I'm starting to worry these high-powered photon rifles might be a little unbalanced. Either way, the mighty Canhead was shot no less than 6 times, and he's currently reconsidering his life choices. With that, we have now taken down one of 3 major cannibal kingpins. We have assimilated his strength into our own, and now emboldened by our victory, we can pursue our next target, the Meatlord. A lot of people would look at the Meatlord and assume he's some kind of high-functioning bonobo ape. However, that would be their first and last mistake. The Meatlord is actually one of the greatest minds in all of Kenshi. Deep within that softball-sized head of his is the intelligence of several IBM supercomputers, calculating and interpreting millions of possible variables and outcomes within a fraction of a second. If we can take him out, the cannibal faction will be intellectually devastated, most likely causing them to devolve into some sort of anarcho-socialism. By this point, our smithing has actually become fairly advanced, and we've manufactured some pretty nice suits of armor. Of course, we're still at a huge numerical disadvantage, but that didn't stop us from carving our way through the cannibal territory northward towards the first village. Here, we found the Meatlord along with approximately 100 people trying to get my channel demonetized. It's okay, fellas, I don't need any help with that. Additionally, it seems like one of my mods has transformed the Meatlord into some sort of 17th century sex gimp. Very interesting. However, sex gimp or not, I still have to eat him. Just for fun, I decided to try a frontal assault. In hindsight, I've decided this was a bad decision. Now revitalized through the powers of save scumming, we are prepared to take a more nuanced approach. There's literally no way we can fight all these goddamn mongoloids head to head, so instead I've decided to adopt the playstyle of the extraterrestrial, which is to say we abduct people and shove things up their ass until they die. Now look, abducting people is hard enough these days with all these laws and self-defense classes, but it's practically impossible when your targets have coalesced into some sort of omnipotent biomass. And that's exactly what we're dealing with here. They have eyes everywhere, and sneaking up on them just isn't working, so I've decided to create a honeypot. I would approach the cannibals with a lone female character, perform a traditional tribal mating dance, and then lead 4 to 5 enemies away from the main group. I take them just around the corner, at which point my team of midget assassins launch themselves off the nearby ridge and incapacitate our enemies. Then it's off to horny jail for these young fellas. It took us a week, but slowly, night by night, we managed to whittle down the cannibal numbers to very reasonable levels, at which point we assaulted the Meatlord. In response, he decided to put us through the most rigorous cock and ball torture that I have ever personally experienced, witnessed, or even heard about. But eventually, he got tired of caving our skulls in and collapsed out of exhaustion. Historians would soon classify this as a Pyrrhic victory, but a victory nonetheless. We now have only one target remaining, the Grand Cannibal Wizard. Normally, he might not be much tougher than the Meatlord. However, I installed a mod which gives him a magical wizard staff that literally peels the skin off of his enemies. Why did I do this? Well, masochism, it's a funny thing really. Regardless, I've come to some difficult conclusions. We are not strong enough, and since we can't afford to increase our numbers, our society will need to evolve into a more militarily capable form. There's a lot of options in Kenshi. We could become a gang of kung fu masters, crustacean crusaders, or even the YT-1300 Millennium Falcon. However, our decision would ultimately depend on the enemy we're fighting. So what exactly is the apex predator of illiterate tribespeople? Well, I spent some nights researching this, and that's when I realized it's the British colonial army. After weeks of research and development, I managed to transform our cannibals into a small battalion of musket-wielding colonials. We even have cavalry, sort of. Historically, there are plenty of accounts of a small number of British colonizers defeating thousands of tribal warriors in combat. I'm hoping we can replicate that success in our war against the cannibals. Don't worry though, we're still cannibals, just fancy cannibals with guns, and powdered wigs. There is, however, one issue. The British Army was known for many things, but they weren't known for their use of quadruple amputees, and we've got a lot of them laying around. They can't fight, and I didn't really want to feed them anymore, so I just kind of dropped them in the ocean. After recruiting a few more cannibals, we're back at full fighting power. Now you may be wondering just how effective these muskets are. Well, fortunately, we had an opportunity to test them earlier when we were attacked by 4 cannibals. Here's what happened. 4 cannibals break into our base. What the devil? As I grab my powdered wig and Kentucky rifle, blow a golf ball-sized hole through the first man. He's dead on the spot. Draw my pistol on the second tribesman, misses him entirely because it's smooth bore and nails the neighbor's bone dog. I have to resort to the cannon mounted at the top of the stairs, loaded with grape shot. Tally-ho, lads! The grape shot shreds 2 men in the blast. The sound and extra shrapnel set off car alarms. Fix bayonet and charge the last terrified rapscallion. He bleeds out waiting for medics to arrive, since triangular bayonet wounds are impossible to stitch up, just as Her Majesty the Queen intended. That is all to say that the weapons are inconsistently incredible, and that's good enough for me. One other important aspect of the British Army during this time was that whenever it would get into a conflict, it could draw manpower from its numerous colonies. We don't have numerous colonies, but we do have a lot of money and cocaine, which we use to bribe the local alcoholics to be our bodyguard for a week. Eventually, we managed to accumulate an army of close to 30 drug-addled mercenaries, which we can lead around with a small packet of cocaine hanging from the end of a stick. Between our newfound manpower and technological advancements, I think we're ready. It's time for war. We prepared some portable cannons, plenty of ammunition, and we set out to engage in some good old European diplomacy with our final target. Arriving outside the gates of the cannibal capital, I had the men set up base camp. This could be a protracted conflict, and in case we become overwhelmed, we can retreat to our defenses to repel the attackers. I arranged our soldiers in a line battle formation just outside the enemy gates, and we started picking off stray cannibals. I'm not going to lie, there's something a little morbid about watching a man be blown apart by 20 muskets at the same time, even if he is your enemy. Eventually, the enemy forces caught on to the fact that they were being colonized, and they began to assault our position in full force. Our mercenaries were key in this moment because they functioned as a meat shield to brace our ranged units against the cannibal onslaught. It was a hard-fought battle with a tasteful amount of friendly fire, but eventually we shot, stabbed, and ate our way into the cannibal city. There he was, the Grand Cannibal Wizard in all his glory. God, he's even wearing a cuirass. If we can take him down, the day is won. At this point, I've lost all functional control over my gang of cocaine soldiers, and they're just kind of marauding through the enemy base for the most part. It's up to us now. I assembled a formation of muskets, and we focused fire on the Grand Wizard. I decided it would be sensible to encircle the Grand Wizard. This would prevent him from engaging all of us in melee combat at once. This worked, however, it also caused a hilarious amount of friendly fire, which made for some very inappropriate letters of death. Regardless, we started colonizing the Grand Wizard really hard, and after about 37 volleys of musket fire, he was paralyzed from the waist down. He did initiate some kind of breakdancing routine as a last-ditch effort, however, this did not stop us from rifle-butting him to death. Some of our soldiers lost their lives to the wizard's long-distance peeling, but that's a small price to pay for absolute cannibal dominance. Fighting persisted throughout the day, but eventually we managed to quell all rebellions. Now in control of the cannibal capital and without any enemy leaders remaining, we are the dominant cannibal faction in Kenshi, and our challenge is complete. We have created a thriving cannibal empire, and we are now poised to abolish all property rights and to destroy the capitalist pig dogs. Why? Because we are morally virtuous people, obviously. I want to thank this month's patrons for funding these videos, and finally, thank you for watching.